The stagecoach rattled into Steins Pass, New Mexico territory, on a scorching afternoon in July of 1882. And the woman who tumbled out into the dust looked more like a ghost than flesh and blood. Her face flushed crimson with fever and her eyes glassy as marbles. Franklin Xavier had been leaning against the hitching post outside the general store, waiting for a shipment of barbed wire that never seemed to arrive on time, when he saw her stumble and catch herself against the stage wheel. The driver was already hauling down trunks and mail bags, too busy to notice one of his passengers swaying like a cottonwood in a windstorm. Franklin pushed off from the post and crossed the dusty street in long strides, his boots kicking up small clouds with each step. "Madam," he called out, but she did not seem to hear him. Her traveling dress was rumpled and stained with road dust, her dark hair falling loose from its pins. She pressed one hand to her forehead and looked around the small cluster of buildings that made up Steins Pass with an expression of pure confusion. Franklin reached her side just as her knees buckled. He caught her by the elbow, steadying her weight against his own solid frame. Up close, he could feel the heat radiating from her skin even through the fabric of her sleeve. This was no ordinary fatigue from travel. This woman was burning up with fever. "Is someone meeting you?" he asked, keeping his voice gentle despite the alarm coursing through him. The stage driver had finished unloading and was already climbing back up to his seat, eager to move on to the next stop before nightfall. The woman's lips moved, but no sound came out at first. She tried again, her voice barely above a whisper. "My uncle, Samuel Thompson. He was supposed to be here." Franklin glanced around the sparse gathering of people who had come to collect mail and parcels. He knew most everyone in Steins Pass and the surrounding ranches. There was no Samuel Thompson among them, and more concerning, he had never heard the name before. This was not a large community where a man could hide himself away unknown. "I do not know anyone by that name, madam," Franklin said carefully. "Are you certain he lives in Steins Pass?" Her eyes, which he now saw were a deep shade of brown, filled with tears that she tried to blink away. "He wrote to me after my father died. He said to come here, that he would take me in." Her voice cracked on the last words, and she swayed again despite Franklin's steadying hand. The stage driver called out to him, "She paying for those trunks to stay here, or are they going back with me?" Franklin made a quick decision, the kind he had learned to make in his 32 years of living in this harsh territory. Right or wrong, he could not leave a sick woman alone in the street with nowhere to go and no one to care for her. "Leave them at the general store," he called back. "I will sort it out." The driver shrugged and hauled the trunks onto the wooden boardwalk before snapping his reins and urging the team forward. The stage rolled away in a cloud of dust, and Franklin was left supporting a feverish stranger who looked about ready to collapse entirely. "What is your name?" he asked. Clara Thompson." She looked up at him with those fever-bright eyes. "I do not feel well at all." "I can see that, Miss Thompson. My name is Franklin Xavier. I have got a ranch about 5 miles from here. I am going to take you there and send for the doctor. Can you manage to sit a horse if I hold you steady?" She nodded weakly, though Franklin suspected she would have agreed to anything at that moment just to be able to lie down somewhere. He called to young Billy Patterson, who was loitering outside the saloon hoping to earn a few coins running errands, and handed him a quarter. "Go tell Mrs. Henderson to mind those trunks, and then ride out to Doc Garrett's place fast as you can. Tell him Franklin Xavier needs him at the ranch right away. Tell him it is urgent." The boy pocketed the coin and took off running for his horse. Franklin turned his attention back to Clara, who was now leaning heavily against him, her breathing shallow and quick. His own horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Rusty, was tied nearby. Franklin untied the reins and then carefully lifted Clara up into the saddle. She made a small sound of protest, but lacked the strength to resist. Franklin swung up behind her and pulled her back against his chest, wrapping one arm securely around her waist while he took up the reins with his other hand. She was light in his arms, too light perhaps, and the heat of her fever seeped through both their clothes. He could feel her trembling. "Just hold on, Miss Thompson," he said quietly near her ear. "We will get you somewhere safe and cool, and Doc Garrett will have you fixed up in no time." She murmured something he could not quite catch, her head lolling back against his shoulder. Franklin urged Rusty into an easy lope, fast enough to get home quickly, but smooth enough not to jostle his passenger too badly. The July sun beat down mercilessly, and he was grateful when they finally left the open desert and reached the stretch of his property, where a few scattered trees provided some shade. The Xavier Ranch was modest but well-maintained, consisting of a sturdy adobe house with a covered porch, a barn, several corrals, and a bunkhouse for the handful of ranch hands Franklin employed. As he rode into the yard, his foreman Miguel Reyes came out of the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. Miguel's eyes widened when he saw Clara slumped in front of Franklin. "What happened, boss?" Miguel asked, hurrying over. "Found her just off the stage, sick with fever and nobody to meet her," Franklin explained as he carefully dismounted, keeping Clara supported in his arms. She had lost consciousness during the ride, her head lolling against his chest. "I sent for Doc Garrett. Can you help me get her inside?" Miguel nodded and held the door open as Franklin carried Clara into the house. The interior was dim and blessedly cooler than the blazing outdoors. Franklin's housekeeper, Rosa Reyes, Miguel's wife, looked up from where she had been kneading bread dough at the kitchen table. Her mouth formed a small O of surprise. "Dios mío," she breathed, quickly wiping her hands clean. "Bring her to the spare room, Senator Franklin." Franklin had 3 bedrooms in his house, though he only used one. His parents had built the place years ago with hopes of filling it with children and grandchildren, but that had never come to pass. Now Franklin lived here alone except for Rosa, who came daily to cook and clean, and he had grown accustomed to the echoing quiet of empty rooms. He carried Clara to the spare room and laid her gently on the bed. Rosa was already beside him, pressing her hand to Clara's forehead and clucking her tongue. "She is burning up. We need to cool her down before the fever cooks her brain." Rosa sent Miguel running for cool water and clean cloths while she began loosening Clara's tight collar and removing her dusty traveling jacket. Franklin stood awkwardly by the door, uncertain whether he should stay or leave. Rosa glanced at him and waved him away. "Go, go. This is women's work now. I will take care of her until the doctor comes." Franklin retreated to the porch and sank into one of the wooden chairs there, suddenly aware of how fast his heart was racing. He told himself it was just the urgency of the situation, the natural concern any decent person would feel for someone in distress. But as he sat there watching the road for signs of Doc Garrett, he kept seeing those fever-bright brown eyes looking up at him with such vulnerability and confusion. What had brought Clara Thompson all the way to Steins Pass, New Mexico, to meet an uncle who apparently did not exist? Had she been deceived, or had something happened to the man? Franklin's jaw tightened at the thought of someone deliberately luring a young woman out to the territory under false pretenses. There were men cruel enough to do such things, though he hated to think it. Miguel brought him a cup of water, and Franklin drank it gratefully, only then realizing how parched he had become. "Rosa is bathing her face and arms to bring down the fever," Miguel reported. "She says it could be many things: bad water, bad food, or just the shock of the journey in this heat. I hope Doc Garrett gets here soon," Franklin said. They did not have to wait long. Within an hour, Billy Patterson came riding back with the doctor following behind in his buggy. Doc Garrett was a weathered man in his 60s with kind eyes and steady hands. He had been practicing medicine in southern New Mexico for 30 years and had seen everything from gunshot wounds to cholera. Franklin met him at the door and quickly explained the situation. Doc Garrett listened with his characteristic calm, nodding along. "Let me examine her," he said simply, picking up his worn leather medical bag. Rosa led him to the spare room, and Franklin found himself pacing the parlor like an expectant father. He could hear the low murmur of voices from the bedroom, but could not make out the words. Miguel had returned to work in the barn, and Billy had ridden off with his promised payment clutched in his fist. Franklin was alone with his thoughts, and they were churning. When Doc Garrett finally emerged nearly an hour later, Franklin nearly leaped from his chair. "How is she?" "She has a fever, obviously, but I do not think it is anything too serious," the doctor said, settling into a chair and accepting the glass of water Rosa brought him. "My best guess is a combination of exhaustion, dehydration, and some manner of stomach ailment. The stage journey would not have helped any. What she needs most is rest, fluids, and cool compresses to bring the fever down. I have left some powders with Rosa to mix into water for her to drink when she wakes. With proper care, she should be back on her feet in a few days." Franklin felt his shoulders relax slightly. "That is a relief." "She was muttering in her fever dreams," Doc Garrett continued, studying Franklin with shrewd eyes. "Something about her father dying, losing the farm, and letters from an uncle. Do you know anything about that?" Franklin relayed what little Clara had told him before losing consciousness. Doc Garrett's expression grew grave. "I have been in this area a long time, Franklin. There is no Samuel Thompson around here that I know of. If someone wrote to her claiming to be family and inviting her out here, it may have been a ruse. You did right bringing her to your ranch. A woman alone in her condition would not have lasted long." The implication of what might have happened to Clara hung heavy in the air. Franklin's hands curled into fists on his knees. "What kind of person does something like that?" "The worst kind," Doc Garrett said quietly. "But she is safe now, thanks to you. I will check on her again tomorrow. In the meantime, Rosa knows what to do. Keep her cool, keep her hydrated, and let her rest." After the doctor left, Franklin stood on the porch again, watching the sun sink lower toward the horizon. The desert landscape was painted in shades of gold and orange, beautiful and harsh at the same time. This land demanded strength from those who lived here, and it showed no mercy to the weak or unlucky. Clara Thompson had been unlucky. But now she was under his roof, under his protection. Franklin took his responsibilities seriously. His father had taught him that a man's word and his willingness to help those in need were what defined his character. Franklin had no idea what would come of this situation, but he knew he could not turn her out until she was well, and they had figured out what had really happened to her uncle, if the man had ever existed at all. That night, Franklin slept fitfully in his own room, waking several times to hear Rosa moving quietly through the house as she checked on their patient. When dawn finally broke, he rose and dressed quickly, eager for news. Rosa was in the kitchen making coffee, her face showing the tiredness of a long night. "Her fever broke around 3 in the morning," she reported. "She is sleeping peacefully now. Real sleep, not the fevered kind." "That is good news," Franklin said, relief flooding through him again. "She is a very pretty girl," Rosa added with a meaningful look. "And she has no one." Franklin held up his hands. "Now, Rosa, do not start. I helped her because it was the right thing to do, that is all." Rosa just smiled and went back to her coffee. Franklin knew that smile. Rosa and Miguel had been trying to match him with various suitable women for years now, convinced that he needed a wife to fill his empty house. Franklin had simply never met anyone who stirred his interest enough to consider marriage. At 32, he had built a good life for himself. His ranch was prospering, he had loyal workers, and he answered to no one. That was enough. Or at least, it had been until yesterday. Franklin spent the morning working with his cattle, trying to keep his mind occupied. But he found his thoughts drifting back to the house, wondering if Clara had woken yet, how she was feeling, what color her eyes would be without the glaze of fever. He caught himself and forced his attention back to his work, annoyed at his own distraction. It was nearly noon when he returned to the house for the midday meal. Rosa met him at the door with flour on her hands and an excited expression. "She is awake. She asked where she was and who brought her here. I told her everything. She wants to thank you." Franklin's stomach did an odd little flip. "Is she well enough for visitors? Dr. Garrett stopped by an hour ago. He says she is much improved. Go on, wash up first. You smell like cattle." Franklin cleaned up at the pump outside, then changed into a fresh shirt before making his way to the spare room. He knocked lightly on the doorframe. "Miss Thompson, may I come in?" "Please do," came a soft voice from within. Franklin stepped into the room and had to catch his breath. Clara was sitting up in bed, propped against several pillows, wearing one of Rosa's clean nightgowns. Her dark hair had been brushed and hung in a long braid over one shoulder. Her face was pale but no longer flushed with fever, and her eyes, those brown eyes, were clear and focused directly on him. "You are the man who rescued me," she said. "It was not a question, Franklin Xavier, madam, though I am not sure rescued is the right word. I just helped you off the street. Mrs. Reyes told me you brought me to your ranch and called the doctor and that I have been here 2 days now." Clara's eyes shimmered with emotion. "I cannot begin to thank you enough. I do not know what would have happened to me if you had not been there." "No thanks necessary," Franklin said, feeling awkward under her grateful gaze. He pulled a chair closer to the bed and sat down. "How are you feeling?" "Weak as a kitten, but much better than I was," Clara admitted. "Dr. Garrett says I should be able to get up and move about tomorrow if I continue to improve. I am so sorry to be an imposition on you." "You are no such thing," Franklin said firmly. "Miss Thompson, I want to talk to you about your uncle if you are feeling up to it." A shadow crossed her face. "He did not come to meet me, did he?" "No, madam. And I have to tell you, I have lived in this area for over 10 years, and I have never heard of a Samuel Thompson in Steins Pass or anywhere nearby. Doc Garrett says the same, and he has been here even longer than I have." Clara's face crumpled, and tears began streaming down her cheeks. "I should have known," she whispered. "I should have known it was too good to be true." Franklin found himself reaching for her hand without thinking, giving it a gentle squeeze. "Why do not you tell me the whole story from the beginning?" Through her tears, Clara explained. She had grown up on a small farm in Missouri with her father. Her mother had died when she was young, and it had been just the two of them for most of her life. Her father had been a good man but not a successful farmer. They had always struggled. Then last year, her father had taken ill with pneumonia and died within a week. Clara had been 22 years old and suddenly alone in the world with debts she could not pay, and a farm being seized by the bank. "I had nowhere to go," she said, wiping at her tears with her free hand. Franklin noticed he was still holding her other hand but did not let go. "I took work as a seamstress in town, barely earning enough to rent a room. Then 3 months ago, I received a letter. It was from someone claiming to be Samuel Thompson, my father's brother. The letter said he had been searching for us for years and only recently learned of my father's death. He said he owned property in New Mexico territory and that I should come live with him, that he wanted to take care of his only niece. Did you verify the letter? Write back to confirm. Franklin asked gently. Clara nodded miserably. I wrote back twice. Both times I received responses with more details. He told me about Steins Pass, about his ranch, about how he had done well for himself and regretted losing touch with his brother. It all seemed so real. He even sent me money for the stage fare. She laughed bitterly. Of course he did. He needed to get me here, did he not? Franklin felt anger burning in his chest. You think someone deliberately deceived you, but why? I have been lying here trying to figure that out, Clara said. The only thing I can think of is that someone wanted to lure a woman out here under false pretenses. Perhaps to sell me or marry me off or something worse. When I arrived and no one was there to meet me, maybe that was when the plan was supposed to happen. Except you interfered by helping me. She looked at him with fresh tears in her eyes. You may have saved my life without even knowing it. The thought made Franklin's blood run cold. It was not unheard of, especially in rougher towns, for unscrupulous men to trick young women into traveling west and then force them into brothels or unwanted marriages. The fact that Clara had been sick when she arrived had thrown a wrench into whatever plans might have been made. You are safe here, Franklin said firmly. I give you my word. You will stay at my ranch as long as you need to until you are well and we figure out what to do next. I cannot impose on you like that, Clara protested. You have already done so much. It is not an imposition. I have the room and Rosa is happy for the company. Besides, where else would you go right now? You have no money, no family, and you are still recovering from fever. Clara bit her lip, more tears threatening to fall. You are very kind. I am practical, Franklin corrected, though his voice was gentle. Now you need to rest more. Rosa will bring you some broth for lunch, doctor's orders. He stood to leave, finally releasing her hand. Clara caught his fingers briefly before letting go. Thank you, Franklin, truly. The sound of his name in her voice did something strange to his heart. Franklin nodded and left the room quickly, his mind racing with thoughts he was not quite ready to examine. Over the next few days, Clara grew steadily stronger. By the third day, she was able to get up and dress in some clothes that Rosa had altered to fit her slender frame. By the fourth day, she was sitting at the kitchen table helping Rosa snap beans and shell peas, insisting that she needed to earn her keep somehow. Franklin found excuses to come to the house more often than usual. He told himself it was just to check on how Clara was doing, but the truth was that he enjoyed talking to her. Despite everything she had been through, Clara had a gentle sense of humor and a sharp intelligence. She asked thoughtful questions about the ranch and the territory, genuinely interested in learning about her new surroundings. In the evenings, after supper, they would sometimes sit on the porch together while the desert cooled and the stars emerged in brilliant profusion overhead. Clara had never seen stars like these, she told him. Back in Missouri, the sky had never seemed so vast or so full of light. Everything here is bigger, she observed one night, wrapping Rosa's shawl more tightly around her shoulders against the evening chill. The sky, the distances, the silence. It is beautiful but also a little frightening. It takes getting used to, Franklin agreed. He was sitting in the chair beside hers, his long legs stretched out in front of him. When I first came here with my parents, I was just a boy. I remember my mother crying because it was so different from back east, but she learned to love it eventually. She said there was a freedom here you could not find anywhere else. Your parents have passed, Clara asked softly. Yes, about 5 years ago, within months of each other. My father had a heart attack out checking the herd one day, just did not wake up when he lay down for an afternoon rest. My mother, I think she died of a broken heart. She just faded away without him. I am sorry, Clara said. It must be lonely here by yourself, Franklin shrugged. I have Miguel and Rosa and the other hands, and I stay busy. The ranch does not run itself. But it is not the same as having family, Clara persisted. Do you have siblings? Other relatives? No siblings. My mother could not have more children after me. I have some cousins back east, but we do not keep in touch much. Letters are few and far between. He glanced at her in the dim light from the windows. What about you? No other family at all besides your father, none that I know of. My mother's family disowned her when she married my father. They thought she was marrying beneath her station. I never met any of them. Clara's voice was sad. I used to imagine having grandparents and aunts and uncles and cousins, a whole big family. That is why I believed the letter from Samuel Thompson so easily. I wanted it to be true so badly. Franklin reached over and took her hand. It was becoming a habit, this physical connection between them. I am sorry that happened to you, but maybe something good can still come from it. What do you mean? You ended up here, did you not? And you are safe. You have a place to stay and people who care about what happens to you. That is something. Clara squeezed his hand and smiled. Even in the darkness, he could see the warmth in her expression. Yes, it is definitely something. As the days turned into a week, and then 2 weeks, Clara settled into life at the ranch with surprising ease. She helped Rosa with household tasks, learning how to cook the different foods common to the Southwest. She spent time in the garden. Rosa kept behind the house, pulling weeds and watering vegetables. She even learned to feed the chickens, though she admitted the rooster frightened her with his aggressive posturing. Franklin found himself looking for reasons to be near her. He taught her to ride on one of his gentler horses, a mare named Daisy. Clara was nervous at first, but she had a natural seat and was soon riding around the immediate area of the ranch with growing confidence. He showed her the layout of his property, pointing out where his cattle grazed and where the precious water sources were located. They talked about everything and nothing. Clara told him about growing up on the farm, about the books she had loved to read, about her dreams of maybe becoming a teacher someday. Franklin told her about the challenges of ranching, about the harsh winters and brutal summers, about the constant work of maintaining fences and managing cattle, and dealing with predators both animal and human. It was during one of these conversations, about 3 weeks after Clara's arrival, that Franklin realized he was falling in love with her. The realization hit him like a physical blow as he watched her laugh at something Rosa had said, her whole face lighting up with genuine joy. She had been through so much, lost so much, and yet she still had this capacity for happiness. It amazed him. That night, lying in his bed and staring at the ceiling, Franklin tried to think through what this meant. Clara had no one and nowhere else to go. He had to be careful not to take advantage of her vulnerable position. She might feel obligated to return his feelings out of gratitude, and that would not be fair to her. He needed to give her time and space to figure out what she wanted without any pressure from him. But the heart does not always follow the head's logical plans. Over the following weeks, Franklin found his feelings for Clara growing stronger every day. And unless he was very much mistaken, she was feeling something too. He caught her watching him sometimes when she thought he was not looking. Her smile seemed to linger a little longer when it was meant for him. Her hand would touch his arm or shoulder for no particular reason, as if she needed that connection. It was Rosa who finally pushed the issue. One afternoon when Franklin came in for lunch, Rosa cornered him in the parlor before he could escape to wash up. "When are you going to tell that girl how you feel?" she demanded, hands on her hips. "I do not know what you are talking about," Franklin said, knowing it was a weak protest. "Do not play dumb with me, Franklin Xavier. I have known you since you were a boy. You are in love with Clara and she is in love with you. Everyone can see it except apparently the two of you. She has been through a lot, Rosa. I do not want to pressure her into anything. Pressure her. That girl lights up like a lantern whenever you walk in the room. She asks about you constantly when you are out working. She watches the road for your return like a wife waiting for her husband. Rosa softened her tone. I know you are being honorable, Franklin, but sometimes being too cautious is just another form of cowardice. Talk to her. Tell her how you feel. Let her make her own choice. Franklin knew Rosa was right, but knowing and doing were two different things. It took him another week to work up the courage to actually say something. The opportunity finally came on a Sunday evening after a quiet supper. Rosa and Miguel had gone home to their own small house on the property. Franklin and Clara were alone on the porch as the sun set in its usual spectacular display of colors. Clara, Franklin began, then had to clear his throat. Can I talk to you about something? She looked at him curiously. Of course, you can talk to me about anything. You have been here for nearly 2 months now, he said, choosing his words carefully. You have made a real home here. Rosa loves having you around, and even Miguel says the place feels more alive with you in it. I am glad, Clara said softly. I love being here. Everyone has made me feel so welcome. What I am trying to say is that you are welcome to stay as long as you want, longer than that even, permanently if you wanted. Franklin took a deep breath. Clara, I know your coming here was based on a lie, and I know you have been hurt and disappointed. But I need you to know that my feelings for you are completely real. I care about you. More than care about you. I have fallen in love with you. Clara's eyes went wide, and for a terrifying moment, Franklin thought he had made a terrible mistake. Then she smiled, a smile so brilliant it rivaled the sunset. Oh, Franklin, I was so afraid you were just being kind out of duty. I have been falling in love with you too, practically since the moment I woke up and saw you sitting beside my bed. Relief and joy flooded through Franklin in equal measure. You have? Yes. These past weeks have been the happiest of my life, despite how they started. You have given me so much more than just a roof over my head. You have given me hope and friendship and a place where I feel like I belong. She reached for his hand. I love you, Franklin. He pulled her to her feet and into his arms, holding her close. She fit against him perfectly, her head tucking under his chin. Franklin felt like his heart might burst from happiness. I want you to stay, he murmured into her hair. Not as a guest, but as my wife, if you will have me. Clara pulled back just far enough to look up into his face. Are you asking me to marry you? Yes. I know it is fast, and I know you have been through a lot. If you need more time, I understand. But I love you, Clara, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Yes, she breathed. Yes, Franklin, I will marry you. I do not need more time to know what my heart wants. Franklin kissed her then, finally allowing himself to express the feelings he had been holding back for weeks. Clara kissed him back with equal passion, her arms wrapping around his neck. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Franklin rested his forehead against hers. I promise to take care of you, he said, to make you happy, to give you the family you always wanted. You already have, Clara whispered. You already have. They were married 3 weeks later in a small ceremony at the church in Steins Pass. Doc Garrett stood up as Franklin's witness, and Rosa served as Clara's matron of honor. The local preacher, Reverend Morrison, performed the service. It was simple and short, but to Franklin, it was perfect. When he slid the gold band onto Clara's finger and kissed her as his wife, he felt like the luckiest man in the territory. They held a celebration at the ranch afterward. Franklin invited all his ranch hands and their families, plus various neighbors and friends from the surrounding area. Rosa and Clara had spent days preparing food, and there was music and dancing late into the night. Franklin danced with his bride under the stars, holding her close and marveling at how much his life had changed in just a few months. "Happy?" he asked as they swayed together to the fiddle music. "Happier than I ever imagined I could be," Clara replied, her eyes shining. Who would have thought that arriving sick and alone in a strange town would lead to this? "I am grateful every day that I was standing outside that general store when you stepped off that stage," Franklin said. "It was the luckiest moment of my life." Their first year of marriage was a period of adjustment and discovery, but it was also filled with deep contentment. Clara threw herself into making the ranch house truly a home. She sewed new curtains and cushions, planted flowers around the porch, and organized the kitchen to her liking. She worked alongside Rosa, learning all the skills of running a household in this harsh climate. Franklin was amazed by how capable she was. Clara had a practical nature and a willingness to learn that served her well. She was not afraid of hard work, and she adapted to ranch life with impressive resilience. She learned to preserve food for winter, to make soap and candles, to manage the household accounts. She even learned to shoot, though she admitted she hoped she would never have to use the skill. But it was the quiet moments Franklin treasured most. The early mornings when they would sit together over coffee, planning their day. The evenings on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about their dreams for the future. The nights in their shared bed, holding each other close and expressing their love in the most intimate ways. By their first anniversary, Clara was pregnant. They learned the news from Doc Garrett in early summer, and Franklin thought he might explode with pride and joy. Clara was equally thrilled, though also nervous about becoming a mother. Rosa assured her that it was the most natural thing in the world and that she would help her through everything. The pregnancy progressed well through the summer and fall. Clara stayed active and healthy, continuing her daily routines with only slight modifications as her belly grew. Franklin became intensely protective of her, much to her amusement. He would not let her lift anything heavy or ride her horse after the 4th month. He worried constantly about her comfort and well-being. "I am not made of glass," Clara would tell him with a laugh. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my woman carrying my baby," Franklin would reply stubbornly. "I get to worry." Their son was born on a cold February night in 1884. The labor was long and difficult, and Franklin spent the entire night pacing the porch while Rosa and Doc Garrett attended to Clara inside. Every cry from the bedroom pierced his heart. He had never felt so helpless in his entire life. But when Rosa finally emerged in the early morning hours, tired but smiling, and told him he could come meet his son, all the fear melted away. Franklin stepped into the bedroom to find Clara propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in blankets. She smiled when she saw him. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Franklin approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. Clara pulled back the blanket to reveal a small, red, wrinkled face. The baby's eyes were closed, but Franklin could see the perfect tiny features, the miniature hands with their impossibly small fingers. He felt tears streaming down his face as he carefully sat on the edge of the bed. "He is perfect," Franklin whispered. "You are perfect. I love you so much." "I love you too," Clara said. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names throughout the pregnancy but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at his son's face, Franklin knew exactly what felt right. "What about James? James Franklin Xavier." "We can call him James after your father." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "You would do that. Name him after my father." "Your father would have loved to see this moment," Franklin said. "It seems right to honor his memory." "Then James it is," Clara agreed. She looked down at the baby in her arms. "Welcome to the world, James Xavier." The years that followed were full and busy. James grew from a fussy infant into a curious toddler, and then an energetic little boy who followed his father everywhere around the ranch. Franklin taught him to ride almost before he could walk properly, sitting him in the saddle in front of him and letting him hold the reins. Clara bloomed in motherhood, proving to be a loving and patient parent. She sang to James, told him stories, taught him his letters. She also managed to be a partner to Franklin in running the ranch, taking over more of the business side of things as the operation grew. She had a good head for numbers and organization, and Franklin came to rely on her input on major decisions. When James was 3, they welcomed a daughter into the family. Catherine Rosa Xavier arrived on a spring morning, much more quickly than her brother had. She had Clara's dark hair and Franklin's blue eyes, a beautiful combination. James was initially skeptical about sharing his parents' attention, but he soon became fiercely protective of his baby sister. The ranch continued to prosper under Franklin's management. He expanded his herd, bought additional land, and hired more hands. The work was hard, but it was good work, building something that would last beyond his lifetime. He took pride in knowing that he was creating a legacy for his children. Clara remained the center of his world. Even after years of marriage, even with the daily routines and challenges of life, Franklin still felt that surge of love every time he looked at her. She was his partner in every sense of the word, and he could not imagine his life without her. They faced challenges, of course. There was a drought one year that had Franklin worried about losing cattle. A severe winter another year that tested everyone's endurance. A bout of influenza that swept through the area and had them terrified for the children. But they faced everything together, supporting each other through the hard times and celebrating the good times. As the children grew, Clara sometimes talked about the strange circumstances that had brought her to New Mexico. They never did figure out exactly what had happened with the fake Uncle Samuel Thompson. Doc Garrett had made some inquiries through his contacts, but the trail had gone cold. Whoever had written those letters had covered their tracks well. "I used to be so angry about it," Clara told Franklin one night as they lay in bed together, years after the fact. "But now I cannot bring myself to be. If that had not happened, I would never have ended up here. I would never have met you or had our children. Maybe it was terrible and wrong, but somehow it led me exactly where I was supposed to be." "I hate that you had to suffer," Franklin said, pulling her closer. "But I am grateful for every day I have with you. Whatever brought you to me, I am thankful for it." When James was 10 and Catherine was 7, Clara gave birth to their third and final child, another son they named Robert Thomas Xavier. Thomas, as they called him from the start, was a content baby who grew into a sweet-natured boy. With 3 children, the house was always full of noise and activity, but Franklin loved every minute of it. This was what his parents had dreamed of when they built this house, he thought. A family filling it with life and love. The children grew up with the ranch as their playground and classroom. Franklin taught them everything he knew about cattle and horses and land management. Clara taught them reading and writing and arithmetic. They learned the value of hard work and the importance of treating others with respect. They learned that the land was harsh but beautiful, and that it rewarded those who understood it. Miguel and Rosa became like grandparents to the Xavier children, doting on them and spoiling them just enough. Rosa taught Catherine to cook and sew, traditional skills but important ones. Miguel taught James and Thomas to rope and ride with the easy patience of a man who loved children. As Franklin grew older and his children grew up, he found himself reflecting on the path his life had taken. He thought about that July day in 1882 when he had been standing outside the general store waiting for barbed wire that never came. How easily he could have been elsewhere, doing something else, and missed seeing Clara step off that stage. How different both their lives would have been if he had not decided to help a sick stranger. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened to you if I had not been there that day?" he asked Clara one evening. They were sitting on the porch, as they had so many thousands of evenings before, watching the sunset. The children were grown now. James was 21 and essentially running the day-to-day operations of the ranch. Catherine was 18 and being courted by the son of a neighboring rancher. Thomas was 11 and still young enough to be playing in the yard. Clara was silent for a moment, considering the question. "I try not to think about it," she finally said. "But sometimes I do, and it terrifies me. The best-case scenario is that someone else would have helped me and I would have recovered and found some kind of work in town. Worst case, I do not want to imagine. Whatever plan that letter was part of, it was not meant for my benefit." "I was meant to be there," Franklin said with conviction. "I believe that. We were meant to find each other." "So do I," Clara agreed, reaching for his hand. Even after all these years, after thousands of times holding hands, the touch still sent warmth through him. "You saved my life that day, Franklin, in more ways than one. You gave me a life worth living." "You saved mine too," Franklin replied. "I did not even know I was lonely until you arrived and filled all those empty spaces." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared. Thomas came running up to the porch, full of some story about a snake he had seen near the barn. Catherine called from the kitchen that supper would be ready soon. James rode into the yard on his favorite horse, tired from a long day checking fence lines. This was Franklin's life. This was everything he had ever wanted, even if he had not known he wanted it until Clara arrived. A woman who had come to Steins Pass with nothing but a fever and broken dreams had become the foundation of everything good in his world. As the years continued to pass, Franklin watched his children grow into adults and start families of their own. James married a kind woman named Sarah from a ranch near Las Cruces. They settled in a house Franklin built for them on the northern section of his property and started having children of their own. Catherine married her childhood sweetheart, Tom Harrison, and moved to his family's ranch 20 miles away. She came to visit often, bringing her growing brood of children with her. Thomas, the youngest, showed an interest in studying law. It was an unexpected path, but Franklin and Clara supported his dreams. Thomas eventually went east to school and then returned to practice in Las Cruces, though he always made time to visit the ranch that had shaped his childhood. Franklin and Clara aged together gracefully. His hair turned silver, and lines deepened around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. Clara's dark hair developed streaks of white, which Franklin told her made her look distinguished. She would laugh and swat at him playfully, the same way she had when they were young. They remained active on the ranch even as they grew older, though they gradually turned over more responsibilities to James. Franklin could not quite let go completely, still riding out most days to check on things, still making the major decisions in consultation with his son. Clara still managed the household and the gardens, though she had help now from James's wife Sarah. On their 25th wedding anniversary, their children threw them a celebration at the ranch. Friends and family came from miles around. There was food and music and dancing, just like at their wedding all those years ago. Franklin danced with Clara under the stars once again, his arms around her waist, her head resting on his shoulder. 25 years, Clara marveled. It seems like yesterday and like forever ago all at the same time. Best 25 years of my life, Franklin said. Here is to 25 more. I will hold you to that promise, Clara replied with a smile. They did not quite make it to 50 years, but they came close. Clara fell ill when she was 68, a sickness that Doc Garrett's successor could not quite diagnose or cure. She weakened slowly over several months, and Franklin never left her side except when absolutely necessary. Their children gathered, and the house was full of family as Clara spent her final days surrounded by love. Before she died, Clara took Franklin's hand and looked into his eyes with the same clarity and warmth she had shown since that first day she woke in his spare room. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything, for saving me, for loving me, for giving me this beautiful life." "Thank you," Franklin replied, his voice breaking. "You are everything to me. You are everything to me." "Tell the children I love them," Clara said. "Tell them to remember that even the hardest moments can lead to joy. I came here with nothing, lost and sick and alone, and I found everything that mattered." Those were her last words. She closed her eyes and slipped away peacefully, Franklin holding her hand to the very end. Franklin grieved deeply, but he did not break. Clara had given him too much strength over their years together for that. He continued to live at the ranch, surrounded by his children and grandchildren. He told them stories about their grandmother, about the remarkable woman she had been, about the courage it took to start over in a strange place. He lived for another 8 years after Clara's death, long enough to see great-grandchildren born, long enough to see the ranch continue to prosper under James's management, long enough to know that the legacy he and Clara had built together would endure. Franklin died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 76, in the same bed he had shared with Clara for decades. His children found him in the morning, looking peaceful, as if he had simply decided it was time to join his beloved wife. They buried him next to Clara on a hillside overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the land and the family they had created together forever. The headstone was simple, but said everything that needed to be said. Franklin Xavier, 1850–1926. Loving husband, father, and grandfather. He lived with honor and loved with his whole heart. And beside it, Clara Thompson Xavier, 1860–1919. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She arrived lost but found her home, but the true legacy of Franklin and Clara Xavier was not written in stone. It lived in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It lived in the ranch that continued to thrive. It lived in the stories passed down through generations about how their great-grandfather had rescued their great-grandmother off a stage in Steins Pass when she had nowhere else to go, and how that simple act of kindness had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime. James Xavier, now an old man himself, would tell his grandchildren about that day in 1882, the story passed down from his parents. "Your great-grandmother arrived with nothing but a fever and broken dreams," he would say. "Your great-grandfather could have left her there for someone else to deal with, but he did not. He helped her because it was the right thing to do. And from that one moment of compassion came all of us, this whole family, everything we have." The children would listen wide-eyed, trying to imagine a time when their strong, proud family had started with a single act of kindness between two strangers. "Remember this," James would tell them. "The choices we make matter. The people we choose to help matter. You never know when one moment of doing right might change everything." And so the story lived on, passed from generation to generation. A reminder that love can spring from the most unlikely circumstances, and that the greatest adventures often begin with the smallest acts of kindness. The ranch itself remained in the Xavier family for generations, each new steward adding to what Franklin and Clara had built. The house was expanded and updated, but the core of it remained the same. The spare bedroom where Clara had first recovered from her fever became known as Grandma Clara's room and was kept as a guest room, a place of honor in the family home. Visitors to the ranch would sometimes ask about the two headstones on the hillside, and whoever was there would tell them the story. Some people found it romantic, some found it inspiring. Everyone agreed it was remarkable how much had grown from that single moment when a cowboy decided to help a sick woman off a stagecoach in a dusty New Mexico town. The ranch flourished through changing times. It weathered economic depressions and droughts, and all the challenges that came with the 20th century. The Xavier family adapted while staying true to the values Franklin and Clara had instilled: hard work, integrity, compassion for those in need, and above all, the understanding that family was everything. Catherine's descendants kept detailed journals and letters that documented the family history. Among the most treasured items was a small packet of letters, carefully preserved, that Clara had kept from her early days. The false letters from Samuel Thompson were there, a reminder of how she had been deceived. But also there were letters from Franklin during a brief period when he had to travel to Texas on business early in their marriage. Letters full of longing and love that showed the depth of their connection. There was also Clara's own journal from her first year in New Mexico, where she wrote about her growing feelings for Franklin and her amazement at the life she was building. One entry, dated 6 months after her arrival, read, "I think I am falling in love with Franklin Xavier. He is nothing like what I imagined when I dreamed of love back in Missouri. He is quieter, steadier, stronger in ways that have nothing to do with physical strength. He makes me feel safe. He makes me feel valued. He makes me feel like I have finally found where I belong." And another entry from after their wedding. "I am Mrs. Franklin Xavier now. I still cannot quite believe it. 3 months ago I was alone in the world with nowhere to go. Today I have a husband who loves me, a home that is truly mine, and a future full of possibilities. If that is not a miracle, I do not know what is." These documents became treasured family heirlooms, windows into the beginning of a love story that had shaped so many lives. As the 21st century dawned, the Xavier Ranch was still going strong, now in its 5th generation of family ownership. The descendants of Franklin and Clara numbered in the dozens, spread across several states, but still connected by their shared history and pride in where they came from. Every few years, the family would gather at the ranch for a reunion. They would eat and laugh and share stories. The children would ride horses and play in the same places their ancestors had played. The adults would walk up the hillside to visit the graves of Franklin and Clara, paying respects to the couple who had started it all. And someone would inevitably tell the story again, how it all began on a hot July day in 1882, when a woman with a fever stepped off a stagecoach in Steins Pass, New Mexico, and a cowboy named Franklin Xavier made the decision to help her. How that simple act of decency had led to a lifetime of love and a legacy that continued generations later. It was a story about kindness and courage, about taking chances on strangers, about finding love in unexpected places. It was a story about building something that would last, about creating family and home from nothing but hope and hard work. It was, in the end, a very American story, played out in the harsh beauty of the New Mexico desert, where the land demanded everything but could give back so much to those brave enough to meet its challenges. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth, that Franklin Xavier had taken one look at a sick stranger and decided she was worth saving, and Clara Thompson had taken one look at her rescuer and decided he was worth loving. Everything else, all the years of joy and struggle, all the children and grandchildren, all the sunsets watched together and challenges faced together. All of it flowed from those two decisions made in a single moment. The Xavier family understood this. They understood that their prosperity and happiness were built on a foundation of compassion and love. They understood that the choices made by their ancestors still echoed through their lives, and they were grateful. On the ranch, the work continued day after day, year after year. Cattle were raised and sold, fences were mended, the land was cared for and respected. And in the evenings, whoever happened to be at the main house would often step out onto the porch, that same porch where Franklin and Clara had spent so many evenings together, and watch the sun set over the New Mexico landscape. The desert had not changed much in all those years. It was still harsh and beautiful, still demanding and rewarding in equal measure. The stars still blazed overhead with the same brilliance that had amazed Clara on her first nights in the territory. The silence still had that same vast quality that could be both peaceful and intimidating. But the house was different. Where Franklin had once lived alone in rooms too big for one person, now there was life and warmth. Where Clara had once arrived sick and lost with nowhere to go, now there were generations of descendants who knew exactly where they belonged. The story of Franklin and Clara Xavier became more than just family history. It became a parable taught to each new generation about the importance of kindness, the power of love, and the way that individual choices can ripple out to affect dozens or even hundreds of lives. It reminded the Xavier descendants that they came from people who had faced hardship with courage and built something beautiful from unpromising beginnings. Sometimes late at night, when the wind whispered through the cottonwoods and the house creaked with age, people said you could feel the presence of Franklin and Clara still watching over the place. It was a comforting thought, the idea that the love they had shared was so strong it could not be entirely extinguished even by death. Whether or not ghosts were real, the legacy certainly was. It lived in every Xavier who chose to help a stranger in need, remembering how their great-great-grandfather had once done the same. It lived in every marriage built on mutual respect and partnership, following the model Franklin and Clara had set. It lived in the very land itself, cared for by generations of the same family, each one adding to what came before while preserving the best of the past. The ranch house, expanded and modernized but still recognizable as the home Franklin had built, stood as a monument to what two people could create when they found each other against all odds. The hillside graves overlooked all of it, a silent reminder that everything below had started with them, with their choice to take a chance on each other when logic said they should have remained strangers. And so the story ends where it began, in Steins Pass, New Mexico, though the town itself barely existed anymore. The railroad had changed routes, people had moved away, and most of the old buildings had crumbled back into the desert dust. But the Xavier Ranch remained, thriving and strong, a testament to the enduring power of love and family. Franklin and Clara had started with nothing but a fever, a misunderstanding, and a cowboy's instinct to help someone in need. They had built a life, a family, a legacy that would outlast them by generations. They had proven that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected circumstances, and that true love, once found, could create ripples that extended far beyond the original two people who dared to trust their hearts. In the end, Clara had been right in those final words. She had come to New Mexico lost and alone, and she had found everything that mattered. And Franklin had found his purpose in loving her and building a life with her. Together, they had created something that would endure long after they were gone. A family and a home rooted in the New Mexico soil, as permanent and enduring as the mountains on the horizon. Their story was complete, with a beginning, a middle, and an end, but also with a continuation in every Xavier who came after them. It was a love story, yes, but also a story about the American West, about survival and adaptation, about the courage it took to build something new in a hard land. It was about taking chances and making choices and living with integrity. Most of all, it was about two people who found each other when they needed each other most, and who built a lifetime of happiness from a single moment of kindness. That was the legacy of Franklin and Clara Xavier, and it would live on as long as there were Xaviers to remember and honor what they had created together.